Okay, look, if you ask me, I love personal essays, but I was shaped by the era of the internet where personal essays were everything. I thought that era was long gone, but to my delight, recently a couple of essays became the talk of the internet. Today on the podcast, are essays exciting again? A lot to talk about. Let's go. I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. Okay, so recently, two personal essays published on New York Magazine's The Cut were the talk of the internet. One was about divorce. The other one was about someone who fell for a scam and handed over $50,000 to a scammer. It is that unbelievable. People had a lot of thoughts about these essays, and it reminded me of this era of the internet where personal essays always went viral and people just couldn't get enough of them. This all relates to a recent personal essay by Tajja Isen. She wrote about how authors are now expected to write viral essays to sell their newest books. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about this return of the essay in the air. Tajja Isen is here. Vivek Shraya is here. Vivek, Tajja, welcome to the show. How's it going?
Hey, thank you. It's good to be here.
My pleasure. Tajja, let me start with you. I remember an era of like Exo Jane and Gawker and Jezebel and the All, and those that was the era where like essays regularly sort of went viral. They were usually from a personal vantage point, and the writer is so paramount in packaging it, they become like a lightning rod for that conversation in that moment. And I was thinking about this, and then I read your piece, and your piece is not about that. Your piece is about the demands on a writer to become a representative of an idea in a public space and a public debate. I think there's a bit of overlap here, but let's just talk about your piece for a moment. Tell us what compelled you to write this piece and how it relates to your own experience in this realm.
Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of saw this issue from two different directions. One was when I was working as an editor at a couple of different magazines, where writers and their publicists were pitching me saying, hey, can you run this near my pub date? A book is coming out. But I felt it most intensely as a writer when I was publishing and trying to figure out how to promote my book, Some of My Best Friends. And I felt the very strong expectation to sort of take the biggest issues in the book and, position myself as an expert or a spokesperson. That was sort of the thing that it was expected of me to do to help sell the book. Mm-hmm. And in my case, those issues would have been things like sort of institutional failures, often having to do with equity and diversity. And I had a lot of trouble kind of drumming up a good essay about that question and didn't really want to be the public face of that issue. And it didn't really feel sort of faithful to me as a writer or to the book. So instead, I decided to write a kind of meta essay on the sort of phenomenon, on the expectation itself, because it was something I talked about with a bunch of other writers and got a kind of overwhelming sense of, have I got a story for you? From memoirists and fiction writers and essay writers who felt like they would touch on an issue in their book, and then all of a sudden that they would be expected to become a subject expert or position themselves publicly as a subject expert on that thing. And then in a kind of galaxy brain way, I convinced my editor to run that essay on my paperback pub day last week.
I mean, there's something really beautiful about the way that you just described it, but also I think like what you're getting at is this discomfort in the space between, hey, I wrote about this versus, hey, I'm the only person who knows stuff about this. You should ask me more questions about this. And actually, I'm going to come back to that in a minute because Vivek, when the piece by Tajja went up, you replied in all caps saying, thank you for saying the thing. What was it about Tajja's piece that resonated with you so much?
I mean, the whole time right now, I'm like doing poetry snaps while Tajja is speaking. I mean, I run into this a lot. And again, I don't want to slam anyone because I do think, when a book is coming out, it's all hands on deck. And I've always wanted to be, like Tajja says in her piece, like, that good author that's going to do all the self-promotion. But it's like, I've written a memoir. It's called I'm Afraid of Men. There's a lot of like, it's personal exploration. And then it's like, hey, have you thought about writing an op-ed on masculinity? And it's like,
you're like, no,
yes,
maybe, but like, no, this is not what I'm invited to do. Yeah, of course.
Exactly. I've written the book. And then I also get in the fiction world as well, where, a few years ago, I published a book called The Subtweet, and it's about social media and whatnot. And, again, it was like, how about an op-ed on social media? And, the thing as an artist is I'm constantly grappling with what is the best medium for a conversation.
Yeah.
And if I thought that a personal essay was the best medium, that would have been the medium I would have chosen instead of, a 300-page novel in a fictional world. And I think the other thing that's a bit frustrating too is that like things get dangled a little bit. So it's like, well, okay, but if you write this op-ed, maybe we'll give you the cover. We'll give you the cover story. Maybe. And so it's like, okay, fine. I will write this like other thing that I don't really want to do, but like, you're not going to say no to a cover. And then of course the cover doesn't happen and you haven't been paid for this op-ed because, we're all doing you a favor by, printing this article to publicize your book. And it doesn't feel great,
But like, so at the core of this though is a dynamic that I'm really interested in, which is that it seems to me that the reason why publishers ask you guys to do this, but also ask so many writers to do this, is that readers are kind of attracted to this, Tajja. There's something attractive to the dynamic when a writer becomes the face of an issue or becomes the entry point into an issue. Why do you think readers are so drawn to this particular dynamic?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's when it comes to a sort of big, topical, sometimes messy, complicated issue, I think it's, it can be very compelling to have a charismatic voice kind of cut through the noise and help you figure out how to think. And I think too, when it's the kind of viral personal essay that you're talking about, it's juicy, right? Like everybody loves it. Who doesn't love a scam story? So I agree. There's an appeal from the reader's perspective, even if that appeal doesn't always translate into a book sale, which I think the expectation might kind of be.
Right. The effectiveness of these essays is a whole other conversation. In terms, they might raise your profile for a moment. They might raise sort of the virality of that article. They don't necessarily end up translating to sales. Vivek, what's your take on why maybe readers are so drawn to this dynamic of a writer becoming their entry point into an issue?
I mean, I think part of it is like TLDR when it comes to books, where it's just like, well, I could get a book or I could read this essay.
Yes.
Like my argument here is my argument is that I think that maybe the personal essay actually sabotages book sales because it's like, well, I already read the op-ed about, quote unquote topic. Why do I need to read a whole book about it? I don't know.
Yeah. But I was thinking about this, Tajja, as those essays were going viral. And both of them were published in The Cut. Maybe I think it was like a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago. One was about divorce. It was called The Lure of Divorce, and it was sort of challenging this idea of like, hey, sometimes maybe you're really attracted to the notion of divorce, but is that always the best solution for you? The other one was the scam story. But as I was watching the reaction to that, I was actually like really surprised at how much just personal vitriol both of these writers were getting and receiving for becoming the mouthpieces of for someone for just saying, hey, I was scammed and this is my story, and the other person saying, I was really drawn to the notion of divorce until I realized I might be the bad person. And then the internet just kind of came out and said, I think you might be a bad person. What did you make of the reaction to those personal essays? Like, do we know how to engage with a personal essay anymore?
Yeah, no, we do not.
Okay.
My overwhelming sense. my overwhelming sense was how have we still not learned how to read personal essays? Because especially the divorce essay, that's a gorgeous piece of writing. It is, brilliantly structured, deeply heartfelt, great story. The writer Emily Gould really takes a surgical eye to her own experience and complicity in her relationship. And readers just kind of took it as an opportunity to offer a referendum on her personal choices and here's what I would have done differently. Which I guess is, the sort of dark side of the appeal to these pieces that you were asking about. It's it becomes about, not about the essay itself, but it's very easy to kind of make somebody the main character on the internet for a day.
Well, so Vivek, let's talk about this because you work in a lot of other different disciplines. You work, you do literature, but also music, television. Do you see these added promotional pressures being offloaded onto artists in all fields of entertainment, or is it really just with writers?
No, I definitely see it. So last year I put out an album and, we approached an outlet, we'd love to have a review or a conversation or something like that. And they were like, what about like a day in the life or, like five things you need to be inspired, or what does your studio look like? And, I grew up during the era of like reading long form essays about like Radiohead recording like OK Computer and that dialogue, and, I don't know that anyone needs to know that I like write in a closet, or like turn off all the light. Like, I don't know that that's interesting enough. And I really
interesting to me, Vivek. I enjoy it. Continue. Sorry. Yes.
I would read that.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, listen.
Sorry to pivot in the other direction here. You're going to go like, oh no, you said an interesting thing, Vivek. Sorry.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But, I understand the pressure for clicks.
Yeah.
But I think that there's such a pressure for content instead of conversation. And I think we also are undermining what the audience wants, right? By like just pushing out content. I think I know for me, I'm looking for those like deep, long reads and conversations with artists.
Right. Yeah. Tajja, when you think about this moment, I can imagine someone listening and saying, I understand that this is a lot of pressure to sort of become the face of these conversations. But on the other hand, I can understand why, publishers would want you to do these. There is a draw to the personal essay as sort of like the key point here to sort of understand these issues. What do you make of that? What do you make of this tension between wanting to sell a book or wanting to sort of make your author become a household name in some ways, which is what publishers are trying to do, and then your desire to say, you know what, I'm not the only person who can speak to this issue. In fact, don't put me in this position.
Yeah, I think the reason there's an increasing pressure to do so is because, as Vivek was saying, there's kind of a decline of, there's fewer outlets for book reviews now. There's been a decline of sort of serious, sustained coverage and engagement. And so, the writer was sort of already expected to participate in the selling of one's work. And so there's a kind of heightened expectation to do that now because there are fewer places for it to happen elsewhere. I do like to think that there is a middle ground. There is a good version. There is a way of sort of being a writer in the world and putting out pieces of one's work that doesn't require allowing yourself to be pigeonholed, I guess. So I guess the way I think about navigating that tension is what are pieces of writing that still feel faithful to the book that I wrote, that don't always have to take the widest angle lens or position a writer as an expert where they're really not. Like, I think there needs to be a wider acknowledgement that is a kind of that need not be an expectation in the process. If the writer is comfortable doing that, great, but it's not the only way or the most authentic way to sell the work.
Well, and Vivek, to me, sort of speaks to the centrality of this, the ambition of virality for both publishers and writers. And maybe that's not the best way to engage with an audience, and maybe that's not the best way for this idea to find its people. But I think the internet sort of presents us with virality as like the key mode for you to sort of be present. What do you make of the pressures of virality on an artist, and what it says, like, hey, sometimes you write a really beautiful thing that is really worthwhile being in the world and it doesn't go viral. That's not a failure. In fact, that might be a feature.
I mean, listen, I think about this all the time. I mean, I was around a bunch of influencers who were trying to convince me that the reason why my music career isn't where I want it to be is because I'm not on TikTok trying to go viral. Like, I think there is this argument at all times that the thing that we should be aspiring for the most is going viral. And I'm someone who's always advocating artists, especially emerging artists, like, don't pay attention to the numbers, don't pay attention to the metrics, don't follow that stuff, because especially when you're on tour, and to talk about books specifically, you can't actually, you can track things like book sales, but you actually can't track how often someone picks up a physical object and engages with it and it has an impact. And when you're out in the real world off the internet, I can't tell you how often I meet people who I'm not able to track their response. I'm not able to measure. And I think that there's so many things about the metrics that get left out. And so, I understand the facade and the pressure, but at the same time, I think if you're in it for the long game, you need to let go of all of that.
Tajja, maybe we got 30 seconds left. Last word to you on this.
I am really inspired by what Vivek just said. I think that it can be useful sometimes to keep an eye on the world and its responses, but I think, you can't be too focused on virality because that'll filter too much into the work in a way that's not good for it. So I think, striving for a balance of being engaged with the literary and reading community and protecting one's time and output is important.
Tajja, Vivek, that is a perfect place to leave it. Thank you so much to both of you for being here. Thanks for your time.
Thanks so much for having us.
Pleasure, of course. Vivek Shraya is an author, musician, and actor based in Toronto. You can catch her TV series How to Fail as a Pop Star on CBC Gem. Tajja Isen is a writer based in Las Vegas right now. You can read her essay, Do I Really Need to Op-Ed to Sell Books at Vulture. I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud, and you are listening to Commotion. That's a song called Beta Par. It's from the soundtrack of the film Laapataa Ladies. Ever since the movie premiered at the Toronto International Film Festival last year, there's been a lot of anticipation about this film's release. The story follows two brides who get mixed up while on a train ride through rural India and end up with the wrong husbands. It's directed by Kiran Rao, and it's in theaters now. Here to tell us about why this film is generating so much buzz here and abroad is culture writer Aparita Bhandari. Aparita, welcome back to Commotion.
Hey, Elamin.
Nice to see you. How you doing?
I'm all right. It's been a minute.
It has been a minute. I'm happy that you're here.
I'm happy that I'm in studio with you.
Talk to me about this movie. What is this movie about?
So, Laapataa Ladies, as the title suggests, and it's such a delicious title, is about these two young brides on a train. And if you've ever traveled by train in India, personal space, not a thing. So,
got it.
So, because they're wearing these long veils, which would be tradition, there's a switch that happens. And so the wrong bride gets off with the wrong groom. Deepak takes Jaya by accident instead of Pool, his actual wife. And they end up at their house and discover, oh my gosh, what's happened? A bride switch.
Sure.
Not quite the bait and switch, but a bride switch. So then it's a story about Jaya, who appears to be a little shifty.
We should explain that these are arranged marriages.
Yes.
So,
these are tradition. Yeah, these are arranged marriages. These
so
young
the husbands wouldn't have known.
No, they would have known, but it's just that the veil is so long, so they've completely covered their face, and they're all the same veil.
Right.
So but that's the reason why. And and the guy even says, same height, same veil. It's an easy switch to make. So anyway, so then the story is about Jaya, who seems to be not quite who she is, and Pool trying to make her way back, and life lessons learned all the way around.
Okay, it's being described as either a social drama or a comedy. How are you describing it?
It's a rom-com caper.
Okay.
With some social messages.
You just invented a genre right here in studio.
I
what
did,
is a
the
rom-com?
director did.
Talk to me about a rom-com caper. What is that?
So it's got the beats of a rom-com, right? I mean, the bride switch, young love, and all of that sort of stuff. But because of Jaya and what she's up to, there's kind of like this caper element to it. There's a little bit of kind of, and there's a corrupt cop who is actually very good at his job. And so there's so many things that are sort of in this mixture where, there are so many expectations of what these tropes are. And this movie constantly keeps on challenging them, which is brilliant. And there is a social sort of, PSA element. But the brilliant thing is that there is no exposition. It's all within plot and character.
I love that.
Yeah. So there is no kind of lecturing that happens. So,
okay.
Yeah, that is why the social drama, sort of description has been there. Because there are commentaries on what does a veil mean, patriarchy, violence against women. There's a bunch of really weighty subjects actually that the movie deals with.
Yeah.
But it's all through comedy or through this kind of caper thing,
Can we talk about Kiran Rao for a moment? So this is their second movie.
Yes.
A lot of excitement for a second movie. How do we get this much excitement for only a second movie here?
Well, so Kiran Rao came 12 years ago to TIFF with Thobi Khat, or Mumbai Diaries, which was her kind of debut feature. She is a very accomplished person in herself, but she's also the ex-wife of Amir Khan, who's like a big Bollywood celebrity. Yeah. And that first film had Amir Khan as like an actor in it. So there was a lot of buzz around it, and that story was a very personal kind of love letter to the city. Yeah. Very quiet, very, very gentle type of a film. And at that time, Hindi cinema was kind of, the sort of sense of naturalism was really, really coming in quite strong in a mainstream sort of context. So there was a lot of interest in her, but then she kind of disappeared for like a decade. But she was behind the scenes. She was producing, she was writing, she was doing all these things for other people. Yeah. Meanwhile, kind of seemingly, working on other projects that weren't quite fitting, but then this story.
Were people following her career as she was doing that stuff? Like,
yeah. Okay. Because those are big films that she was behind. Lots of films from the Amir Khan production company, which she really saw through. So.
Okay, so let's talk about Amir Khan for a moment. He's attached to this production. He's not in it. Instead, there's a lot of fresh faces featured in this movie. Is it the kind of film that you think could make its stars sort of big name actors?
I hope so, and I also don't. Because when you become part of the machinery, there is a certain, then you kind of become part of the machinery, right? And this is the thing about this film, that there's such a freshness to it. Yeah. Like, even though it is like, from Bollywood, like it is, the Hindi film industry, and Kiran Rao is very much a part of that big budget, the usual sort of, what we say, tam jam type of, like that big kind of masala film.
Like the gigantic Bollywood movies,
This is a much sort of gentler, quieter type of a film, and having these unknowns from theater or TV come in. Yeah. So they're not that unknown, like a bunch of them are TV. And it's funny, like I was just watching another Netflix series yesterday, and I was like, oh, that was that actor from that scene. And I was seeing characters in there. So they're not completely unknown. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. I hope there's such a sweetness to it. So I hope that they do get, a break, I suppose. Yeah. That's always nice. But I also kind of hope that, I don't know, I just want to hold on to them and be like, just be this, just be pure. And,
The look that you're giving is incredibly wholesome. But I mean, let's talk about that. What are, if you think about this movie and the place that you wish for it to occupy, if it's not this like big, giant Bollywood production, but you do want it to sort of have a place in the culture. What are your hopes for this movie?
So just like I'm going to take Korean cinema as a thing, right? Yeah. So just like Past Lives or Parasite. Nice. Kind of, these, I mean, Parasite is a little different because Bong Joon-ho does so many things, right? Yeah. And he's constantly putting stuff out. But just like that, how these sort of films kind of become part of a bigger zeitgeist. Yes. I'm just hoping that Laapataa Ladies also, like this sort of groundswell of affection for it comes through, and we get to talk about a lot of the themes in the film later on in life, just as Parasite did, or just as Past Lives did, about whether it was a social satire or whether it was about young love or high school love or whatever. I hope this film is an occasion to talk about issues. It's about, basically at the end of the day, it's about women losing themselves and finding themselves. Mm-hmm. So I'm hoping that it really gives us a chance to talk about that idea of discovering yourself.
Maybe 30 seconds left here. You saw this movie twice. You're clearly
I went again yesterday.
Oh my God.
I took my kids.
Tell me more. Why did you go twice? You got 30 seconds left.
It's just, the first time it was a blur. Yeah. The second time I was like, okay, there was a time slot. Yesterday I went because I wanted to refresh my memory about it. Yeah. But also I wanted my kids to see it. Like, I mean, there's a couple of lines in there that might be a little questionable. Yeah. But it's just such a gentle, charming, middle of heartland of India type of a story with messages in there, and it's just like the perfect film. Go watch it; it's like perfect for a rainy day.
What I like about this is that you have absolutely no chill about this movie, and that's great.
No, I'm gonna go watch it again. Okay. I'm taking friends.
Amazing. I'm coming to you. Aparita, thank you so much for coming in. It's so good to see you. You're the best.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you. Aparita Bhandari is a culture writer in Toronto. Laapataa Ladies is in select theaters right now.
Goodbye. No use leading without chin. This is where our story ends. Never lovers, ever friends. Goodbye.
That is a bit of I Wish You Love by Eleanor Collins. And we thought we'd go out today on Eleanor Collins because Eleanor died yesterday. She was 104 years old. Eleanor was known as Canada's first lady of jazz. She works alongside greats like Oscar Peterson and Dizzy Gillespie. She spent much of her life in British Columbia, and our colleagues have written so much about her tremendous legacy. If you want to read more, cbc.ca/British Columbia. That is it for the podcast today. I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud. Hey, we're going to be back tomorrow. I'll see you then.
In the spring, to give your heart a song to sing, and then a kiss. But more than this, I wish you love.